some snacks, we have a number of refreshments. I'm Diane Wall, the Assistant Director here at the Melrose Public Library, and I am so pleased to welcome you to our beautiful new meeting room space. Yeah. Tonight we're happy to have Melrose author Jane Healey with us to talk about her latest historical novel, The Women of Arlington Hall. She writes about lesser-known women in American history, and this time she tells the story of a female codebreaker who puts her future and her heart on the line in a stirring novel about love, loyalty, betrayal, and Cold War spy games. Jane is the author of the Saturday Evening Girls Club, The Beantown Girls, Good Night from Paris, and The Secret Stealers. She has given presentations about the history behind her novels to hundreds of libraries, book clubs, and organizations around the country. She's also the host of this historical happy hour podcast that I just mentioned, where she interviews fellow historical fiction authors about their latest novels and offers historical fiction book recommendations in a virtual program sponsored by the Ashland Public Library and a collaboration of Massachusetts and New Hampshire libraries. Jane shares a home right here in Melrose, which you may know, with her husband, 2 daughters, a cat, and a cute dog. Please help yourselves to all these refreshments which the Friends of the Library have sponsored for us. And we have Teresa from Molly's Bookstore over here. And thank you for coming, Teresa. And she's going to be selling the books, and Jane will be happy to sign them after her talk. So with that all said, please join me in welcoming Jane Healey.
And I'm so happy to be in this amazing new space and that the renovations are done here. Tonight I'm going to talk about the Woman of Arlington Hall, the origin story of how I came up with the idea, the history behind the story, and then a little bit about how I came to write it, my writing process. And then I will take questions at the end. But thank you all for coming out on an August night to listen to me talk about my new book. I'm always so grateful when anyone shows up. I still have had events where it's just been like my mom and her friend and so I'm so grateful, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. So I think that since this is my hometown, oh, of course now this isn't. Let's see. There we go. You all know of my books, so I'll just go into a little bit of a summary about them. I was a freelance writer when my girls were young. They're 19 and 22 now. I freelanced for Boston Magazine and a lot of other different magazines in the Boston area. I'd always wanted to write fiction though, and I wrote an article about the Saturday Evening Girls Club in Boston's North End, and that was the first time I came up. I was like, okay, I think I could make this into a novel. And I still remember the conversation. We were in the backyard, and I said to my husband, how hard could it be? And then it was 10 years later, I finally figured it out and got it published. So that came out in 2017, followed by The Beantown Girls in 2019. It took me a little less time this time to write it. That was about the Red Cross Clubmobile girls in World War II. And then I call this my pandemic book in 2021. The Secret Stealers is about the women of the OSS, the precursor to the CIA during World War II. And then my latest book before The Woman of Arlington Hall was Good Night from Paris. And that was biographical fiction about Drew Layton Tartier, who was an American actress who left Hollywood for love and ended up part of the underground network in occupied France rescuing Allied pilots. And actually, that was my 4th novel. That was not supposed to be my 4th novel. This was supposed to be my 4th novel. I had been thinking about it for many years, but when I was researching The Secret Stealers, I found out about Drew Layton Tartier, this actress, and I pitched it to my publishers, and they're like, oh yeah, write that next. And so that ended up being my next book, but this one, this is the origin story of this idea. In 2018, I came across this article in the Smithsonian Magazine, The Women Codebreakers Who Unmasked Soviet Spies. It was written by the brilliant nonfiction author Liza Mundy. I was just talking about her. And this is at the height of the Cold War, America's most secretive counter-espionage effort set out to crack unbreakable ciphers. This woman in the picture is Angeline Nani. This is in 2018, and she was 99 years old in this photo. And she was one of the last of these code breakers that were part of this Russian group, also known as the Winona Project. And so when I learned, I've read this article, I can't even tell you how many times since, but I held on to it because I'm like, I know there's a story there. There's something there. You know, the details of the program, one of the reasons, it's called the Winona Project, it was also called the Russian Project. I think why many people hadn't heard of it is because it was only declassified in 1995. And there's still portions of the program that have never been declassified. So Angeline was part of this program, along with many other women. 90% of the code breakers in the Winona Project were women. And their mission was to crack the Soviets, the KGB's unbreakable, they were considered unbreakable coded messages to Russian spies in the US during World War II. And this group the home of this group was Arlington Hall. This is a picture of Arlington Hall. It was, the Army and the military intelligence took it over during World War II. They put up barricades, you know, barbed wire fences and guards, and they expanded, they did some makeshift building in the background. And so this, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, sorry, the second time of the presentation. So, so this was the home of the Army, it was later the home of the NSA. It was a former private girls' school. This is a very old picture of it. But during the war, the military took it over, and they continued to take it over through the 50s. So I was really interested in thinking about these women. How am I going to write about these women? How am I going to get into this story? But obviously, it took a long time to marinate. It's 2025. And so before I get into the Women of Arlington Hall, I want to step back and talk a little bit about the historical landscape of the time. I was ready, after 3 World War II books, I was really ready to write about a different era. I was ready to research a different era. It was an interesting time. It was a new atomic age. The Americans had tested and then used an atomic bomb. They tested one on July 16th in 1945. This article was just from last week, actually, in the Washington Post, catching it on our tongues, how 12 girls became the first atomic bomb victims. And there's a lot about Oppenheimer and the success of the atomic bomb test and the success of the atomic bomb and the technological advancements. But no one talks about the fact that there were 250,000 people in that area downwind that were exposed to the radiation levels and suffered catastrophic effects for years later. And so the scientists working in Los Alamos and elsewhere on the Manhattan Project, some of them were really conflicted about what they had unleashed on the world. And then, of course, this is actually today happens to be the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima, and it ended the war, but at what human cost? That was one thing that I was really interested in, how these scientists responded to that. So Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened on August 6th and on August 9th, 80 years ago. That camp that I just showed you in the article, that was Camp Ruidoso in New Mexico. It was an all-girls camp that was literally right downwind from it. And the fallout was falling from the skies. The girls thought it was warm snow. And then 4 years later, the US did not have the atomic bomb, the monopoly on the atomic bomb for long, as a lot of you know. In 1949, the Soviets developed their own atomic bomb. So it's a new scary age, it's a new time for Americans. And then there's also the paranoia and secrecy of the era. So figures like Joseph McCarthy, who was accusing half of Hollywood of being Russian spies. But in reality, and not a lot of regular people in America knew this, but the Soviet spies had infiltrated the US government agencies, military intelligence, CIA, FBI knew this, but most people didn't know that. In fact, even McCarthy didn't even know how many Russian spies were in the US government at that time. The Communist Party of the United States, the CPUSA, was actually a recruitment mechanism for Soviet spies in the US. Soviet embassies and consulates, particularly in DC and San Francisco and New York City, were covers for the Soviet spies that were coming back and forth from Russia. So what was the Venona Project? This pamphlet, when I started really researching this story, I reached out to the historians at the NSA and they sent me this pamphlet, and they also sent me a bound copy of all the coded messages that had been deciphered and translated over the years. It was a huge bound book, which was invaluable to my research. So they were a select group of codebreakers at Arlington Hall. Their number one and only mission was to break the encrypted Soviet spy communications. And it's still to this day, the Venona Project is considered one of the greatest counter-espionage triumphs of the Cold War. And still, as I said, still only portions of it are declassified. So in World War II, how did it get started? In World War II, the US started gathering these telegrams that were going back and forth between Moscow and the United States. They didn't know what they were going to do with them. They were encrypted and they were also in Russian, but they just started filing them away at Arlington Hall because they felt like they might need it at a later date. They were starting not to trust the Soviets. So this top secret group was formed in around 1945, and the mission was to try to break into these messages and read Stalin's mail, essentially. So this is one of the pictures, one of the vintage pictures from Arlington Hall. By 45, they had a large group up and running, and they were still getting over 2,500 Soviet telegrams were being intercepted a week. So you can imagine, they just kept adding file cabinets. And if you can see in the picture, it was mostly done by hand. They had these large IBM punch card machines that could kind of do a rudimentary comparison of code groups, but most of it was done by hand by these men and women. And one codebreaker described it as messages were like a billion pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, all of them black. And so they really made slow progress until this man entered the picture. And when you see his picture, I think you'll know, like, oh, of course you have to put him in a book, because look at him, like, he looks like this. So this is Meredith Gardner. And if you're going to write about the Venona Project, you have to write about Meredith Gardner. He was essentially the head of it. They brought him in. He is, to this day, a legend in the field of cryptology and code breaking. He was recruited as a linguist in 1942 by the Army. He was very introverted, very quirky, did not suffer fools. He would be called neurodivergent today for sure. The more I read about him, oh yeah. So he spoke anywhere between 9 and 12 languages, depending on what source you read. And he was working first in the German code breaking group. And then he taught himself Japanese when he began working with the Japanese code breaking group. And he taught it to himself in 3 months, fluent Japanese. So complete genius. And he took over the group, and they started under his leadership, under Meredith's leadership, they started making breakthroughs and discoveries. And they started finding the code names of spies in the US. They started seeing real names. They were able to translate and discover real names of some of the scientists working at Los Alamos and other places working on the Manhattan Project. And at that point, they're like, we have to bring the FBI. We have to start launching investigations into these people. So they bring in Robert Lampier. And so Robert Lampier was like, if you had to pick an opposite of Meredith Gardner, that it was Robert Lampier. He was the liaison for the FBI. And he starts, trying to work with Meredith. Meredith wanted no part of it, because he was very much an academic. He was a control freak. He didn't like the fact that he was surrendered, that actual actions were going to be taken from these messages they were translating. He was really uncomfortable with the ramifications of what they were discovering. So it took him a while to warm up to this, like, gregarious Midwestern ex-athlete who flirted with all the girls in the office. And, so I go into that a little bit in the book. Again, you can't talk about Venona without talking about Robert Lampier either. So here's these two guys, and they're not like high level in the, they're not high level in the FBI or the ASA, NSA. They're like, they're mid-level managers, and they have these, young women and men working for them. Nobody expected them to do anything, to accomplish anything, and yet they cracked the code and they identified many spy rings, including the atomic spy atomic bombs firing. The group of spies that stole the atomic bomb secrets and let the Russians get hold of that intelligence, and so that they were able to build a bomb 4 years earlier than anticipated. So these were two underdog teams, and when they did start working together, Gardner would supply intelligence to Robert Lampier. Lampier would launch investigations, and then they started making arrests. And one of the girls talks about, and I created a scene in the book based on this piece I read. She was walking by a newsstand, and she sees that Judith Copeland, a Russian spy in the Justice Department, was just arrested. And that was work done. She had helped discover Judith Copeland. And she said that was the first time it dawned on her that like what they were doing had real world ramifications. It was all over the front pages of the newspaper. So by September 49, when Soviets test their own atomic bomb, all of a sudden all eyes are on this little unknown project in terms of US intelligence. And they did so much, they accomplished so much, it's been described as breaking the unbreakable codes, translating the messages was an unsurpassed triumph of code breaking. They painstakingly turned gibberish into powerful evidence of a Soviet spy ring whose ranks included Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And I do get into that in the book too, because of course there's a lot of debate about what happened in the end to the Rosenbergs. So that gives you kind of a big picture of what the Venona Project was, what they accomplished. I want to get into my book, which is about the women. And so first I'll start with what makes for a good, these pictures are all vintage pictures from Arlington Hall. What made for a good code breaker? It wasn't necessarily college education. Some of them went to college, some of them did not. Often they had some sort of musical ability, had a knack for languages, natural gift for math puzzles and word puzzles, and intuitive sense of pattern recognition. That was a key. That was definitely one of the keys. Like some of them if you had it, you had it. If you didn't, you didn't. A magpie ability to gather and remember facts. So like almost a photographic memory. And as I said, like reading about these people, it was a quirky place and lots of different characters, and definitely some of them were neurodivergent. They had ability to hyperfocus, like, you know, an unusual ability to hyperfocus. So now to the women, the unsung women of Venona. As I said, 90% of them, the codebreakers at Arlington Hall and the codebreakers at Venona were women. This is a funny aside. So I got a new editor for this. My editor Alicia left, and I was assigned Nancy. And so she took on this project, and she's like, "You're not going to believe it. My husband's grandmother was a codebreaker at Arlington Hall." And she's like, and she has all these pictures, and so she's on the end there. So she's like all over my website now. So it's like, so that was pretty amazing, a very serendipitous moment. And so these women came from all backgrounds, and I tried to represent that in the book. A lot of them came from small towns and rural towns, and were just looking for a new experience in the big city. A lot of them, you know, one of them was a home ec teacher who hated teaching home ec and wanted to try something different. I mean, I didn't even teach home ec anymore, I hope not. Like, that's just the worst. Ferocious intellects, and again, a powerful command of languages and math. This is how they were also described by Liza Mundy and others. They were patriots. They had a steely commitment to public service and an almost familial devotion to each other. Like it's very clear when you read about them. They couldn't tell anyone else outside of Arlington Hall what they were working on. So then they were often living together down the street too. So they became really close friends, and they loved to socialize. When they were done with work for the day or for the weekend, they would put it aside and go try to like have some fun for a little while. And so they formed some really good bonds as friends. One I want to highlight who's a real code breaker, because there's a Jean in the book, and it's not Jean Verbiel. She's inspired by Jean Verbiel, but she was a trailblazer. She was the second employee of the Venona Project at Arlington Hall. She was one of the home ec teachers. She moved there in 1942. One of her friends convinced her to move to DC, and they gave her like very quick training on the science and art of code breaking, because it is both. And she's one of the two original members, like I said. And their early success at it led to more recruits, particularly of women, over time. And she rose up the ranks of the NSA after many years. And these are just this is another picture of some of the girls from Arlington Hall, Women of Arlington Hall, and some of the many names. There was many women, and some of them, became like deputy directors and beyond at the NSA and CIA. So back to writing the story. I was holding onto this article, trying to figure out my way into the story since for the past, 7 years, and 6 years anyway. And there were some challenges to this because code breaking is really complex. It's also really boring. Like, it's really boring. And so that was one of the things I was worried about. Like, I don't want to like put people to sleep in the first 3 chapters, like, because I'm talking about. But in writing we talked a lot about showing versus telling. So you have to at least, you can't just be like, she was a code breaker and not have any sort of explanation on what that was. So I had to figure out that balance. The Venona project was a massive project. I had to figure out how to like distill that down again so that the book wasn't 800 pages and it wasn't boring readers. And the Soviet spy apparatus was sprawling, and there was code names and there was cover names, and there was the KGB and this GRU, and so like, how do I make that so that people understand what was going on, the essence of the historical facts without, and also entertain. So that, I think that writing it for a long time kind of scared me, and I found though that those are the type of projects that you kind of, if you lean into it, like, and make it work, then it can work out okay in your favor. So I was really intentional before I even wrote a chapter or a page. What was my goal with this book? I wanted it to be more of a friendship story than my last 2 books. I wanted it to be part love story, all spy thriller. That was like my mission statement for this story. One thing about the Good Night from Paris, writing biographical fiction, writing about a real person in history, I felt really confined because she was a real person. I met or talked to her grandkids, and you can't color outside the lines of someone's life when it's a real person like that. So I felt confined. The ending was kind of bittersweet because her life during the war was bittersweet. So this time out, I was like, that's it. We're gonna have a happy ever after. It's gonna be like big romance, and the opposite of the last book. Not that the last book was bad, but I just needed something completely different. And so I took myself back to school a couple summers ago, took a bunch of online courses, reread all my books on craft, kind of really was intentional about sketching out this narrative and what I wanted it to be. Like I said, the main character is fictional. Her friends, the main group of characters, are fictional. They're all composites based on real people, and that gave me the freedom to kind of do what I wanted with them. So that was great. So another thing I thought about is what does this story have to have? High external stakes. Soviets stealing the atomic bombs, really high stakes. So I was like, that'll work. And emotional resonance, again, I wanted strong female friendships and some romance, but I always like to have the romance on the side. And well-drawn characters, of course, and a Hollywood-style ending. It was so funny, my mom called me the other day and she's like, it was like a Hollywood-style ending. I'm like, thanks, Mom. That's what I wanted. So that was good. So the premise I finally came up with after many years. What if a brilliant young woman upends her wedding and her life to become a codebreaker in Arlington Hall in DC? And Kat Colleen is the name of the main character. She leaves Cambridge. For my mom and dad are from Cambridge, so there's some Easter egg references there. She leaves Cambridge to find her calling in DC. Meredith Gardner becomes a mentor after, it took him a while because he was kind of a curmudgeon. And she's one of these women at the time who had never really found her place. She went to Radcliffe, but she came from a working class neighborhood, so she didn't fit in there, but she didn't fit in with her friends that she grew up with either. And so it was kind of, she found her people when she went to Arlington Hall. People like her, women who are ambitious and kind of wanted something more. So obviously this is a novel, and the main goal is to entertain, hopefully inspire and enlighten about lesser known history. But this is the best. Last week I got this picture of Sarah and her sister, and it's a picture of her mom who was a codebreaker in Arlington Hall. And she said, my mother was a code girl, and I recognized much about her days back then in your story. Her name was Evelyn Boyette. And that's just like, that's the type of stuff that you live for as an author. I'm gonna get emotional, but yeah, that was just amazing. So I'm gonna take questions. I just wanna say, and I'm trying not to get emotional again, I've lived in this town for 20 years, so I feel like it's my hometown, even though I grew up in Arlington. And I was saying to Diane, we've come a long way, because I was like, my first book, I was in the children's room, like doing my presentation, and some of you were there, and and we had snacks, and some little kids came downstairs and started crying because the children's room was closed early. And I was like, I had to apologize, I felt so bad. And like my first, Saturday Evening Girls Club presentation, it was like my second time public speaking ever. I was like shaking, sweating, my voice was shaking. It was like, and y'all showed up, and you bought my books, and you didn't know me, and you didn't know if my book was any good. I didn't know if my book was any good. I felt like a total imposter. I couldn't even call myself an author for like 3 years. So just thank you for your support over the years. I'm beyond grateful. This is the best town for creative people, and thank you for coming tonight on an August night and spending some time listening. Thanks so much. Questions you have? Trisha Priestley in the back.
Well, I was curious, what does it feel like to have a billboard?
Oh my God, you're awful. What does it feel like? So last week, my editors for Launch Week surprised me with a billboard across from Penn Station, and my husband has to go back and forth to New York a lot. So I'm like, I know you're not going this week, but we're going. We're going this week. And so we drove down, and he didn't drive to the hotel first. I thought he was, but he drove straight to the billboard, and we came around the corner, and it popped up, and I like burst into tears. It was like crazy. I mean, that never happens. My agent's like, I hope you know this is never going to happen. And I'm fine with that. Like, that was bananas. Yeah. Yes?
What drew you to historical fiction as a genre, as opposed to just true fiction?
Why historical fiction as a genre? That's a great question. I like having a jumping off something. Like, I like having a person, a place, an event as a jumping off point for the story. It feels like I'm less starting from scratch that way. I have friends who write contemporary fiction. I have a friend who writes spicy pocket romance, and she's crushing it, and I'm like, in a million years I could not do that. Nope. So, yes?
When you, after you do your research, do you typically plot out your book? Do you know you have a beginning, middle, and end with all your characters and where the characters and the stories go?
Yeah, do I plot out everything? Yeah, so I do the podcast tonight, and one of the questions I always ask authors is, are you a plotter or a pantser? Do you plot things out? Do you write by the seat of your pants? And I'm kind of like a maniacal plotter. Literally chapter by chapter, scene by scene, all the events that have to go into a scene, so I know, generally speaking, I know everything that's going to happen. I definitely have to pivot and rework stuff sometimes, but I like to have a roadmap. It's almost like a super, super messy first draft. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yes?
What surprised you during the research?
What surprised me during the research? I just kept going back to the fact that they didn't have any computers. I couldn't believe they worked incredible hours. They worked long days. They worked weekends, and they had like I said, these IBM punch card machines that didn't work half the time, and that's all. It was all done by hand. And I'm like, how brilliant and persistent do you have to be to do this job? Yeah. So that was that I kept coming back to that. That was really a surprise.
And just one more comment.
Yeah.
Your illustration on your cover, not only this one, but all of your books, is amazing. I don't know if you
Oh,
know
thank
that
you.
work, but they do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's an agency that my publisher uses, but they do a really nice job. Thank you. Yes.
I used to work in Washington in the early 60s, and I'm just wondering back then how much these women made
Oh, how much money they made in a week? Yeah, so a lot of them, I can't remember exact numbers, but a lot of them left teaching because they made double what they were making as teachers. And then if they worked weekends, they got overtime. So they did pretty well, yeah, for the time, yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, right? I know, they should. Yes?
Okay, sorry. It's funny that someone else talked about the covers, because I read a lot of historical fiction, and it's always women's backs.
Yes. Oh, yeah, women facing away from the camera. We were just talking about that,
I
yeah.
love any background information on why we are so attracted to that.
You know, so my theory, and hello, Laura Ferguson, like that's what this is my friend from kindergarten that I haven't seen in like a decade, and that's what threw me off in the audience. I'm like, Laura Ferguson. Thanks for coming. So yeah, the cover thing is funny. Like things get trendy, and then like everyone jumps on the trend bang. Like we always we joke about another women facing away in a red dress, like the one my last one. Yeah. So things get trendy. I think also the theory is like people like to imagine what the characters look like themselves and not like see their faces. Yeah. So I think that's why. But I think I know like a lot of publishers are like rolling their eyes because there's so many women facing the other way. Like the trend's gonna die. Yeah.
So what was the percentage of men to women in the roles of codebreakers?
Well, one figure I read was like 90% of them were women. A lot of them stayed on after the war. They started working as codebreakers during the war, and they stayed on afterwards. And then the men in the group were often like a little bit older, like couldn't go off to war, so they were engineers, professors, all different walks of life. But yeah.
But then later on in the 50s and 60s, was it still mainly women?
Yeah, in this particular group it wasn't. Actually, Venona kept going. Like after, they didn't close down Venona until like 1980. A lot of these women, that was their trajectory, their career was working on the Venona project.
So I'm curious to understand if it was seen more of an admin job at the time, like after the war. If
this was seen as admin work?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. No, it wasn't seen as admin work, but that's what they told everyone. They told everyone, like they couldn't tell anyone anything, so they told a lot of their family and friends that they were admins, they were assistants, and including like Angelina Nani at 99 years old, her family was just finding out that she was a codebreaker because they were so sworn to secrecy or risk being put in prison or executed. So like that was beaten into them. So
because I remember watching old World War II movies, based in Britain, and the codebreakers then were primarily men.
Yeah,
in those movies, not
right, yeah. No, and that's why I think it's an unusual group. But then they couldn't talk about it, and they're really good about not talking about it. So, yes.
If the topic is top secret, and government agencies don't really share information, and you said some of it's not declassified yet, how daunting was that to get any actual information, and how many details did you include in the book?
Well, I was the Center for History at the NSA sent me like all of the ones that had been deciphered and declassified and translated, so that was really helpful. And that book also had like a timeline of the discoveries and what was accomplished. So I had enough. And the women like Angelina Nani and a few others had finally started talking about it a little bit. We were talking earlier about Liza Mundy's book, Cold Girls, it's nonfiction from World War II. That was also helpful because a lot of those women worked at Arlington Hall. They lived at Arlington Farms, which was like a dormitory that a lot of the women in my book lived at as well. So there was enough, but not a ton. Yeah, and I think that's why it's not a very well-known story.
Even the NSA, a lot of people, they say no such agency.
Right, yeah.
People that work there aren't supposed to say they work there.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know if there was ever any collaboration between codebreakers, agencies in different countries toward a common enemy?
Well, I know, and I go into this a little in the book, MI5 and MI6 was very involved and knew what was going on with the Venona project, and they were sharing information. The question was, were there other countries that were sharing information and working with the US at the time? And I know for sure MI5 and MI6. As for others, probably, but I didn't really come across that in my research. Yes?
So bouncing off that question, how would they get that message? Would they be literally snail mailing it, or would they try to do it through the wire and then have it potentially re-intercepted by, say, Russia or whoever? Like, do you know how they got that information across the pond?
They had like encrypted wires. I remember reading about that. Yeah, so that's how they get that. And they'd also send people with back and forth as well.
Yeah.
Liaisons from like FBI, CAA. Yeah. Yeah.
So as an author, when you broke in and you knew nobody,
Yeah.
and I know from listening to your podcast, you have quite a friend situation within the historical fiction office. How does that happen?
How does that happen? I think that one of the best surprises about writing and getting published is that we all, like other historical fiction authors I know, like we all know how hard, it's so hard. Publishing is hard, it's getting harder all the time to break through, it's getting harder for your book to get attention and to find its readership. And so we all really, we really support each other, you know, we all lift each other up. If I don't feel competitive with them, you know, it's like if they do well, hopefully I'll do well and then the next person will, So
how do you make that connection? Through your publisher, or
no,
you
just
reach out?
it's just been over time. Yeah, it's just been over time. Historical Novel Society. That's a conference that's every other year in the U.S. That's a big networking event for history nerd authors. But yeah, just through different channels. Different friends. I know this person knows. Oh, you should meet her. That type of thing.
Because you're solitary, like most of us are in the world.
Yes. It's a very solitary,
You have to find
Yeah, you have to find your network, for sure, yeah.
I had a question. Is there any statistics on how many arrests were made and what happened with the information that they got from these codes?
How many, the question is how many arrests were made or what they accomplished. So they identified over 300, at least 300 Soviet spies in the US at the time, and they were able to identify 100 of those, and many of them were arrested, including Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Klaus Fuchs was another one. He was in the Oppenheimer movie. He was one of the central figures of the atomic spy ring. They arrested many of them. I can't give you an exact number, but there's still to this day code names with no real person attached to them. Yeah.
So with supporting your fellow historical writers, has there ever been one of your colleagues write a story that you're like, oh, I had that one in my back pocket that I didn't
No, that has not happened to me, but it happens. It's so weird, there's ideas in the air and then all of a sudden 3 people decide to write about it at the same, the Angels of Baton, the nurses during World War II, 2 friends came up with the same, within months, had the same idea, same type of book. A couple of years ago, 3 authors I know wrote various stories about Grace Kelly. 3 Grace Kelly books came out at the same time. And actually, Amy Runyon is her author friend, and when the Beantown Girls came out, she was like, oh, my editor just told me I needed to write about the Clubmobile Girls, and you grabbed that one. So it happens, it does, and it's scary. When you're trying to come up with something new, you're like, has anyone else come up with this? Yeah.
2 questions. First one, I watch a lot of your Zoom. What's the third podcast? What's the story with the camera now in the back?
Oh my God, that's just from one of my husband's old offices. So it's just it's literally our boiler room that we converted into a podcast studio. If I put the camera up, you'd see the insulation falling from the ceiling. It's not fancy. But he painted it all black, and we have the podcast and Zoom lighting, and he threw up some of his old pictures from offices and stuff.
Because you had, all of a sudden over the last few years, that appeared. I said,
yeah.
What happened to the rest?
Oh yeah. No, I know.
Are you working on a new book?
Oh God, I'm trying, but it's hard. I'm amazed. I know a lot of authors like Madeline Martin. She cranks up. I don't know how these people they crank out 2 books a year. I'm slow, so I'm trying, but I'm not there. I'm not ready to share anything yet.
Would you have a co-author or like kids?
I don't know how they do that, because she did that.
The Phoenix Crown.
Yeah, Kate Quinn and Jane Healey did the Phoenix Crown. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like to co-author a book is kind of interesting because it's almost you only have to write half a book if you like doing alternate chapters. You know what I mean? But I couldn't do it. Yeah, no. Marie Benedict. Murray. Murray. Yeah.
The first ladies.
Yeah, Hazel Gaynor and Heather Webb. Yeah. They've done a couple. Yeah.
Robert Dugoni that you had on.
Yes. Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah. I like those guys a lot. Robert Dugoni, he's a great author, and he has a new World War II book out that he wrote with a couple friends who are not really writers, and it's very, very good. Hold Strong. So that's like, what's the name? Yeah.
Jane, I have to say that being on your podcast, I have read more historical fiction.
Thank you, Courtney. And Courtney like shows up for every single podcast, and she also lets me know when she's not going to be there, which is the sweetest. My husband's like, these people are so nice. They tell you when they can't come.
I've also been at Whiteland Bookstore in Reading, Mass.
Yeah, Whiteland. I'm going to go be in Whiteland in September, I think. Yeah. Yes.
Do you know if any of these women, was it like a life's career? Did any of them have families? And, you know, back in the 50s, that was kind of,
Yeah, I mean,
a child and a family, you disappeared.
you know, some of them did move on, have families, and go on with their lives. Some of them like were married to the job. Like Angeline Nani was in that article was married to the job, and her friends, and she had lots of nieces and nephews, and she was happy with that. Jean Greville is another one. Devoted to the job, and had a lot of extended family, but had no interest in getting married.
So when they went on to have a family, could they be the
yeah, I mean, of those I've read, I didn't read a lot. Yeah. Yes.
Who did you base the FBI love interest on?
Who did I base the FBI love? The sweet, slow burn FBI agent. You know, that was kind of, again, a composite. Robert Lanphier had all these guys, these young guys, working for him at the headquarters, at the FBI headquarters, and he wrote a book, The FBI KGB War. I might have mentioned it. He wrote that with someone else, and that talks all about his experience working with Meredith, what his perceptions of Meredith, which were not like super positive at first, like the two of them, and talks about his team and all of that kind of stuff. So. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you for all your wonderful questions. I am happy to sign books. Thank you to Molly's for coming tonight. And this was, you all were wonderful. It was my second presentation of this topic, so thank you for bearing with me.
And I meant to thank Bob yourself from MTV for filming this for us, and this will be available for you to view or to tell your friends who might have missed this opportunity. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, Kim.